right, Fox on top of a lot of storms bearing down all at once, it seems. Welcome, everybody. Happy weekend. I'm Neil Cavuto, and you are looking live right now. Quincy, Massachusetts. Emergency crews are out in full force after a monster storm that turns roads and rivers, forcing a lot of people from their homes. Up and down the East Coast, this story was playing out again and again in town after town. More than 1 million people are still without power. Airports scrambling to get things back to normal after thousands of flights were hospital, where the heat is turning up on the investigators. The top Republican on the House Intelligence Committee warning that the Justice Department, the FBI, may have broken the law with those FISA applications. How? Well, we'll ask Chairman Devin Nunes. He's here. You are also looking live outside Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, where President Trump is set to return and speak to donors following a visit to his golf club. His latest move with steel and aluminum tariffs sparking fears from Wall Street to Main Street. We're about to enter a nasty trade war. And that is where we kick things off, since it seemed to upset some traders, some, and some stocks. All right, more than some. Let's get the latest from Tracy Carrasco. Tracy.
Good morning, Neil. Yes, that's right. A real tariff war could be erupting right now. Let's take a look. Wall Street reacting quickly to the president's sudden and somewhat vague announcement on Thursday afternoon, igniting a sell-off in a market already on edge over rising U.S. interest rates and bond yields. The idea of what essentially would be a 25% tax on imported steel and 10% on aluminum sent stocks tumbling. Investors spooked by the prospect of a global trade war. Stocks tried to recover on Friday as Wall Street and the world await more details from the White House next week. But for this week, the Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all ending in the red. Stocks in Europe and Asia also finishing the week in negative territory following the announcement, as countries around the world began reacting and warning they'll retaliate if tariffs hit companies in their homeland. However, President Trump defending his decision with a number of tweets saying, quote, "We must protect our country and our workers. Our steel industry is in bad shape. If you don't have steel, you don't have a country." He also said, quote, "Trade wars are good and easy to win." And Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, Varney Show, here's what he said.
I just bought a can of Campbell's soup today at the 7-Eleven. It was $1.99 for the can. There's about 3 cents worth of tin plate steel in this can. So if it goes up 25%, that's a tiny fraction of 1 penny. That's not a noticeable thing.
Sure, it may not be a huge difference for a tin can, but what about a larger purchase like a washing machine, a new car? Ford, General Motors, and Toyota responding to the tariffs, with Toyota saying gas or car prices would go up. Quote, "The administration's decision to impose substantial steel and aluminum tariffs will adversely impact automakers, the automotive seller community, and consumers." Again, the White House says it's ironing out the details, and we should learn more next week. The president said he hopes to sign something very soon. Neil.
All right, Tracy, thank you very, very much. I don't know what's more remarkable in the Commerce Secretary's explanation of this, the fact that the impact of this would be so minimal, or the fact that this billionaire pops into a 7-Eleven to pick up a can of soup. All right, let's get the read on all of this with my buddies David Azen and Dagen McDowell, along with conservative commentator Gina Loudon and the former Heinz CEO Bill Johnson. Dagen, where's this all going?
If these tariffs aren't stopped, it is going to do serious damage to the American economy, U.S. consumers, and businesses that actually use steel and aluminum to produce goods that we all use. I think that these tariffs punish the many, and I mean Americans. I mean regular old folks like my mom and dad. Billionaire, a cabinet secretary holding up a can of Campbell's. This is a diversion. It is a ruse to distract from the real damage that this could do to Americans. And I mean consumer prices going up, because a quarter of a car's cost is tied. A few $1,000s for extra on a car is a hit to many Americans. It's a hit to those very automakers. But this also is about jobs. You can't
stop into 7-Eleven to get a car.
No, and by the way, I mean, it's like lecturing me yesterday on the air about.
I saw that, yeah.
Do you know how much six-pack of beer is going to go up. You know what?
That was Peter Navarro mentioned
this
that
little
too.
redneck head knows it's more about than just a cost of a six-pack of beer. It is about the retaliation by countries who are our greatest allies. We've already heard from Europe about $3.5 billion worth of penalties on Harley Davidson, gin makers, bourbon makers. This will destroy jobs. History shows it will do a lot more damage than it helps.
So you like
I'm
it?
putting you down as a David. What do you think of this? What's going to happen?
A couple of things. First of all, we just made fun, I think rightly so, of Nancy Pelosi calling $1,000 in tax breaks crumbs. Remember that? That was just a couple of weeks ago. How soon we forget. And now suddenly you add up all the, it's not just the tin cans, it's a couple of $100 extra you're paying for a car and everything else that we use steel and aluminum in, and you get to well over $1,000. That's not crumbs to most America. Dagans are right. It's also the question, you mentioned whether Wilbur Ross actually went out and bought that can of Campbell's soup. I don't doubt that he did.
No,
but
sure he did.
I do know a little bit about his history, and he made a lot of money buying distressed steel companies. I'm just wondering if a man who made all this money buying distressed steel companies through a conglomerate that he was on the board of is the right person to be lobbying
well, we do.
for.
You raise a good
sports.
Bill Johnson, we're told that this was not universally shared at the White House among top cabinet officials. For example, Gary Cohn of the National Economic Council. We're told the defense secretary, we're not keen on this, urging the president against doing this. So there's some division even within the White House on this, but nevertheless, it is what it is. Now, sometimes the president does this, Bill, to send a message so that you never have to enact the tariffs and all this other stuff, and countries, sort of bend. Do you see that happening?
I don't know, Neil. I often don't like what he says, but generally like what he does. In this case, I don't like either one. And, there's so many places to go with this that I am concerned. He tends to say these things, and then he is a bit of a protectionist and may tend to follow through. But I agree with Dagan. I think this is not a good thing for anyone. And the appointment to those of us in the business community is we were making so much progress deregulating the economy, and then we throw this right back on top. And where does it stop? Do you go to cars next? Do you go to textiles? I mean, where does this stop? And so I think ultimately it leaves confusion and sort of disappointment in the business community. I think that's what the market reacted to when it sold off.
Gina, I can understand where the president's coming from on this. There is frustration that you can't find many American cars in places like Japan, certainly China. And they do make it very tough for American companies to make inroads in their respective markets, yet the world goes nuts if we recognize and state that and try to do something about it. But was this the way to go about it? What do you think?
Well, I think I'm going to be the lone voice in the wilderness here, Neil, but I didn't know exactly how to react to this, but there are a couple of things. One is this president has been saying this was a problem, these unequal trade agreements we have with the rest of the world for a long time. And so we should have known when we elected him that this was probably forthcoming. Secondly, we have the master negotiator in the Oval Office. Let's not forget that this guy knows what he's doing in terms of creating leverage, which is exactly what I believe he's doing in some of this. And then I think lastly, if we were in a war today and we looked back, Neil, and we could have made some of these decisions to have more control over our steel and our aluminum if needed in a war, I don't think we'd regret paying 1 cent on a soda can or even 20 grand on a 7. I think that some of those costs in wartime, if we could look backward, would have been worth it to us.
I don't know,
and
Gina,
I think that we have to do this for national security reasons.
I am not going to buy a 727 now. I'm just not going to do it. I got to make a statement right there.
Close,
I was so close, and then Barney just cheapened out on me. But I do want to get your sense of this thing, because I appreciate where you're coming from. This notion that it's minimal, the impact is minimal, the message it sends is maximum. It will send a message and let countries know, don't even toy with us, and they're going to do something.
They're going to retaliate against American companies. Again,
You don't buy the Trump argument. They need us a lot more than we need them.
No, I don't. And I think that they will. You've already seen evidence. Let's look just back in history. Bush imposed, David and I were talking about before the show started, in 2002, steel tariffs. According to economic analysis, it destroyed more jobs than the total number of people employed by the steel industry at that time.
He was getting heat from both sides, though. The left and the right was whining about it.
And President Trump should be getting heat from everybody in the country who understands just simple economics, quite frankly. It destroyed 200,000 jobs back in 2002 when there were only about 188,000 people employed in the steel industry.
Can I just bring up a fact, too, which is that, yes, there was a big increase in imported steel in 2017, a 15% increase. But in 2017, Nucor, which is the biggest U.S. steel manufacturer, increased its profits and increased its revenue by 25%. So, yes, there was an increase in imported steel. No, it did not hurt steel profits, U.S. steel company profits. They were making more money in 2017 than they were in the year before.
Steel Dynamics, record sales, record income, record shipments last year.
So
even U.S. Steel posting a profit last year.
Are you really willing to punish the consumer that much for an industry that is not being punished that much from a growing economy?
And by the way, and holding up a can of soup or lecturing somebody about the cost of a six-pack of beer, it's condescending. Is this messaging so tone deaf because Hope Hicks isn't there anymore? I know that she just resigned, but again, you got to think about the way this looks, because that looked bad and it sounded worse yesterday.
All right, well, Bill Johnson, I mean,
I'd rather have been a can of beans.
But, you know, Bill, do we have a disparity?
I'd rather have been a can of Heinz beans. At least I'd have gotten some advertising.
All right, but do you realize, is there a way to fix this, make it right, to address some of these trade inequities? Because the president's right about that. I mean, there are some disparities. How do you go about changing? Because we talked before, and those disparities continue. They exist.
Well, I think you have to continue to put pressure, both diplomatically and on businesses in these countries. The reality is, Neil, that you have to be careful because it works both ways. Back to Dagan's point, I can tell you when I ran Heinz, we produced baked beans in the UK using